This is Our Place, Our Time. We'll look at the Colonial Williamsburg Antiques Forum, a program on decorative arts and cultural history. We'll examine the making of the Skyline of Hampton Roads. And we'll hear music from Woody Backner and Jem Masters. Here's your host, Vianne Webb.
Welcome to Our Place, Our Time. For 40 years, Colonial Williamsburg has sponsored an annual antiques forum, bringing together experts on decorative arts and cultural history for a week-long program of lectures and exhibitions, concerts and tours, films and workshops. This year's Antiques Forum begins Sunday, and it has the theme, A Glorious Revolution of Things, from 1688 to 1745. That's the half-century in England and America that we often refer to as the Queen Anne period, for the beautiful furniture that we associate with her reign. It was the era in England of Alexander Pope, George Friedrich Handel, and Henry Purcell. During those years in America, the Capitol and the Governor's Palace were being built in Williamsburg, and the College of William and Mary opened its doors. It was known as the Golden Age of the Colonies. We're going to examine those years and the Antiques Forum from two perspectives. I'll talk with John Sands, a member of the Collections Division of Colonial Williamsburg. But first, we'll have a field report from our Tempe Fisk, who learned some very interesting things about Queen Anne.
She waited until she was 37 to become queen, and she was considered by some to be vacillating, even a little bit silly. But Queen Anne reigned during a period of England's history that produced some of its most recognized artifacts.
Poor Queen Anne. She was rather a pathetic figure among the queens of England, but the literature, music, and furniture of her era are glorious reminders of a time in history when the decorative arts flourished.
This weekend, Colonial Williamsburg celebrates the 40th anniversary of an event devoted to the rise in culture during the half-century from 1688 to 1745. It's called the Williamsburg Antiques Forum, and it highlights what has now become known as the Queen Anne era in furniture and music. Had you been a subject in Queen Anne's court, you probably would have been seated on chairs covered with rich tapestry work, or lounged on chaises made of highly polished rich-grained wood. You certainly would have been entertained by music from one of the most popular instruments of the day, the harpsichord. Thomas Marshall is a master of music. He specializes in early performance practices on keyboard instruments and in historical tunings for each period in keyboard literature. Here he is playing a popular march of the period on an instrument that was built in 1762, an instrument that still retains its clarity of tone. That is because the method of producing music from the harpsichord is different from the now familiar instrument, the piano.
Now, of course, even though the pianoforte had already been invented in the early parts of the 18th century, we find still the harpsichord much preferred in many instances. We know, of course, the harpsichord making its unique sound by plucking at the strings inside, giving a very different quality of tone. But if we look inside the mechanism of the harpsichord, we can clearly see that there is a small stick, not a hammer, the stick then called a jack. When the key is depressed, the jack moves upwards, and a very small piece of turkey quill near the edge of the jack plucks the string next to it and gives me a harp-like sound.
Musical instruments, furniture, and artifacts of the Queen Anne era are just some of the highlights of A Glorious Revolution of Things, this year's Williamsburg Antiques Forum.
Thank you, Tempe. Many of the ideas and practices that have remained central to our ways of thinking and living in the United States have come from the Queen Anne period, at least that's what we called it. And I want to talk about that and the Antiques Forum with John Sands, who is a member of the Department of Collections at Colonial Williamsburg. John, thanks for taking time from this very busy period to come and talk with us. You've called this particular year of the Antiques Forum, which is its 40th year, a glorious revolution of things. And this time period, of course, talks about England and its glorious revolution, but also about a group of colonies that were very close to their eve of revolution. I wondered if you might do an overview for us from the historical perspective of what a visitor or a guest at the Antiques Forum might see on what was going on, what was this glorious revolution in England, how was it reflected in music and furniture, and what was happening in the colonies at the same time.
Certainly, delighted. Well, thank you for...
In 25 words or less.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.
There's so much history here, it just goes on.
We thought it would be appropriate in 1988 to look back to 1688, the year of the Glorious Revolution in England, which was a political revolution when William and Mary were invited by the English nobles to literally invade their own, England and displace the king. And on November 5th, 1688, staged that revolution. That arrival of Europe into England was, on a political basis, was paralleled by a major British awareness of the European styles and culture that was starting to be very, very popular. And essentially, the Baroque style arrived in England coincident with William and Mary. And
yeah, it is a period I think that we can definitely relate to in this, not only in this country, but in this locale in which we live. It was also the period of William and Mary and the founding of the college in Williamsburg.
That's right.
And I think at our stations here, we play a great deal of the music of that period, which of course was the glorious days of Henry Purcell and George Friedrich Handel.
Exactly.
How then is all of that period, that Baroqueness, and yet that grace reflected, what would we see in this furniture that's in the collection on display and being studied at this year's forum? How did the lines change?
What we're discovering is that this is a little bit like a Chinese puzzle with boxes inside boxes. And the central box, the key box, is Louis XIV, who was really leading the way in the cultural change. And the English became aware of the styles that he was encouraging and adopted them a little late. And the American colonies, of course, followed suit after that. And so you get a boiled down version by the time you get to the American colonies, but the styles that were being set into motion by Louis XIV were eventually arriving on these shores, and we were seeing great changes. And it's not just that styles changed, it's that people could afford to have styles change. The plantations here were beginning to be economically viable. People were piling up a lot of money and wanted to emulate their peers at home, or people whom they would like to be their peers at least. And so we see an awareness of the desirability of buying material goods, of building great homes, of demonstrating status.
Then the focus in America had changed from simply survival to adornment.
Very much so. And
they had gotten over the survival of surviving the swamps of Jamestown, of moving inland, and now could afford a different kind of lifestyle.
That's right. So it's really a beginning of a consumer revolution, if you will, and that resulted in large accumulations of things which we hadn't really seen before. People couldn't afford them, and we begin to see some fascinating things being produced.
You said earlier that historians like yourself have discovered something which has caused you to say that you're no longer calling this the Queen Anne period. Why is that? And we've got to change our
Well, I find it hard to
terminology.
change myself because
Yeah.
I was schooled in the old school. But what we've found is that the Queen Anne furniture that was popular in America generally was built long after Queen Anne's death. The same with William and Mary furniture. And what we've discovered, of course, is that the stylistic periods that we have handily used monarchs' names to identify extend far beyond their own reigns. And so for clarity, we've started referring to art historical terms as mid and late Baroque for the William and Mary and Queen Anne periods, and then Rococo for what has been termed Chippendale, and then of course into the neoclassical periods. And that seems to be a lot clearer in tying to art historical terms rather than geopolitical terms which aren't applicable.
Are most of these pieces that are the focus of this year's Antiques Forum, are they American pieces or English pieces?
The Antiques Forum has been very careful over the years to bridge the Atlantic, to make it clear that we are both American and English, and we always try to bring in an English speaker, and we have this year as well. And that's been a focus of Colonial Williamsburg's activity, is we are perhaps more Anglophile than many American museums, and try to be.
Well, I think, of course, that one of the things we know about the depth of the Antiques Forum is that it is, of course, not just a wonderful and exhilarating display of the artistry of furniture, but that you have always taken the true historical perspective of this, and you've woven music into it so beautifully this year, and you take that more humanities approach. And will you not conclude it with a series of lectures that I think you're giving for the public?
The Antiques Forum is one of many activities at Colonial Williamsburg, and we're very proud that in late February and early March we're going to begin a series of lectures on the decorative arts at the DeWitt Wallace Decorative Arts Gallery. We will have as a visiting lecturer for 6 talks Geoffrey Beard, who has run the Addingham Summer School in England and is a real authority on the British Country House. And those will be on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at 4 o'clock, and a series ticket is available.
Thank you, John Sand. The Antiques Forum at Colonial Williamsburg is just one of several events taking place in Hampton Roads over the next few days. Here are some other choices for your consideration. The area you and I live in is most often called Hampton Roads, but there's not a city or a town here named Hampton Roads. Hampton Roads is, of course, a body of water, alongside of which have grown cities that have changed and expanded outward with our mobile population. In recent years, we've seen the skylines of our cities rise higher and higher and spread wider. Our reporter Kim Simon looked into the subject of our city skylines, and she found that the subject begins not by looking up, but by looking at and appreciating what gives Hampton Roads its name.
When envisioning skylines, those man-made junctures of earth and sky, one imagines jagged silhouettes of high risers and skyscrapers, signature structures that distinguish one city from another. Not one, but several skylines outline this region. Individually, they characterize each city. Collectively, they shape Hampton Roads.
This architectural definition, however, has taken time. Developer, philanthropist, and community leader Henry Clay Hoffheimer, who has committed himself to the growth of Hampton Roads for the past 60 years, attributes the sluggish beginnings, in particular the development of Norfolk, to a number of obstacles.
This area was pretty much decimated by fires, by Civil War, by lots of things that did not lend itself. And there was no great amount of inherited wealth in Norfolk. It was always just sort of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps.
And it has, though despite its growth, some believe there continues to exist an abundance of mediocre architecture. Developer Gerald DeVaris, committed to creating a central business district in the Pembroke area of Virginia Beach, explains his theories on why.
I think traditionally the area has catered to the military, and that is naturally a transient population. And so they come and they go. And when you're dealing with a transient market, you don't necessarily have to go the extra mile to provide what one wants for a lasting loyalty to your particular product. However, with the expansion of the area and more people coming to move here, and more of a settled, permanent population, you're beginning to get an awareness of the need to provide a better product. Unfortunately, again, I think our attitude and the basis we're coming from is we believe we're a hot dog and hamburger place. And if you believe you're a hot dog and hamburger place, you get into that phobia of saying to yourself, well, I only have to develop a hot dog and hamburger type building. Nobody's really building the long-lasting buildings, the buildings that are going to cater to a different, more sophisticated palate.
This is not a hot office building market, and as a result, developers cannot get too adventuresome architecturally with buildings. They tend to build buildings that are very simple, they're small, they tend to rent quickly, and that's a risk factor, and it would take a very adventuresome developer to employ great architects to do their work.
Goodman Seeger Hogan president Bob Stanton took the risk, building the 9-story, $41 million World Trade Center in what was at the time a depressed part of downtown Norfolk, as did Daniel Hoffler of Armada Hoffler Enterprises headquartered in Chesapeake.
I can remember 8 years ago when I was building our first buildings in Chesapeake, and people would say from all over the area, way out in Chesapeake, you know, and we don't want to go that far out, and you know, and that's miles and miles. I mean, people acted like they've never even driven through Chesapeake before. And of course, that's changed.
Changing growth patterns are visibly evident throughout the region and are reflected by distinctive developing skylines. High-tech industries are settling in Newport News and Hampton. Vertical expansion is well in progress in Norfolk's financial district, as are residential high-rises in the newly renovated areas of downtown Portsmouth. Virginia Beach is turning into a commercial center, and Chesapeake is coming into its own. But as developers vie for space, there is concern whether quality architecture can be generated in a rapid growth situation. Dennis Duff, partner of Dills Ansco Duff of Virginia Beach and president of the Hampton Roads chapter of the American Institute of Architects, explains.
I think that's one of the unfortunate things, is that in the Hampton Roads area, while there is some regional cooperation, it is not by any means extensive. Each city pretty much operates independently as far as planning of the built environment is concerned.
Both developers and planners agree that Hampton Roads is building up and out too quickly, although it is the contention of some, like Dominion Tower developer Harvey Lindsay, that in real estate, supply must sometimes outweigh demand.
With office space, you have to build ahead of the market. You have to have the inventory for the tenants to come in and take. They don't really like to lease a building unless they see what it is. It's finished and they can see the quality of the building and gauge that.
Placing an emphasis on sophisticated and innovative design might result in attracting new businesses and more tenants, say area developers. For the time being, however, design concepts continue along a conservative trend, as building materials, not structures, shape the skylines.
The material that is being used recently on some of the more prominent, more expensive buildings, particularly in downtown Norfolk, is the red granite. Town Point Center has that, Dominion Tower has that, and it is a very handsome material, also very expensive. Other materials that have been used in the past are precast stone and concrete, lots of glass curtain walls, and they each have their own sense in what they're trying to convey. I think what that says to the public and to the tenants of the space, that it is a permanent building. It connotes strength, and I think that the degree of permanence really is manifested in that material.
Hampton Roads continues to gain recognition as a metropolitan area. It has come a long way in just the past 5 years. It is not without its critics who analyze its empty pockets, low-rise business complexes, and lack of outstanding design. But for those familiar with the area, who have spent time here, the Hampton Roads skyline is not just a jagged string of verticals. Here, the building's edge meets water's edge. A special lighting reshapes silhouettes, while an active harbor adds distinction to the changing skylines of Hampton Roads.
In our place, it's now time for music. We have with us two of the finest jazz players in Hampton Roads, guitarist Woody Backner with Jim Masters on bass. And the piece they'll play is called Bossa for Fuzz. We have hope for this edition of Our Place, Our Time. We have Hope Mihalap, writer and speaker, And where hope is, there's always good humor, an observant eye for our follies, and a keen ear for the way we talk.
I don't know if you know, but my name is Hope.
That's an example of a Tidewater accent. There's another one. That one says, come over to the house about 3 o'clock and we'll have some tea in the garden. Now, have you noticed what's unique about the Tidewater accent? It's the vowels. It's the O, the crazy O of Tidewater, Virginia. I have a theory about that. If I had plenty of time, I could be what we would call a sociolinguistic historian and try to figure out why we pronounce our O like that, about, this way. I think it's because the first people who settled this area were from England. Isn't that right? Now, somewhere in our subconscious, we still have that English accent. Because what would an English settler say if he were to say one of those sentences? He would say, I don't know, Hope, about you. He would say precisely the same thing. Maybe that's why we still have it. It's not just Virginia. Of course, it's Tidewater in general. North Carolina, coast, Maryland, Delaware. As you move up, you still have that funny O. Who settled those regions? The English. As a matter of fact, when you get to Maryland, it does a few more odd things. It's not just I don't know, it's I don't know. Now, I'm not sure what happens to it up in Baltimore. Something goes wrong, but the strange O is still there. Now, of course, there's no danger of losing that funny O, no matter how much television and other accents barge in on us, because that's a matter of age. Have you noticed that between the ages of 12 and 21, every Virginian says, I don't know about you, Hope, but I'd like to borrow your comb? You find me a teenager who doesn't talk like that. As for the other accent, we are in danger of losing it. That's what I would call the FFV, good old families accent. That's a dowager accent. Come over to the house about 3 and I'll serve you tea in the garden. Not many people say garden anymore. That's going away. But you'll notice something about the about in the house, which is what people tease us about. They say it in Canada, too. Now, who settled Canada? Some English people. This is one of my theories. There's another theory I have, and that's this, that when you talk about accents, Southerners are really very polite. People make fun of us all the time. They make fun of us when we say about. They make fun of us when we say I don't know. Do we make fun of Midwesterners? Hardly, but we could. Because the next time some Midwesterner says to me, oh, I want you to come over to the house and have a cheeseburger, I'm going to laugh. Bye.
Thank you for being with us tonight. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and at that time we're going to take a look at how Hampton Roads archaeologists are working to preserve our valuable historical heritage. And we'll meet composer Undine Moore and hear music by her. We hope you'll be with us then on Our Place, Our Time.